them. With that, I want to hand it over to our moderator, Brian Kaleo of Dykema. Brian, you can take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. Everybody, Brian Kaleo again. This is our third installment. I'm the director of Dykema's DSO industry group. Again, I wish the circumstances were better, but nevertheless, my pleasure to be here. And we're going to go through sort of our third update of what's going on in the dental industry given the public health crisis that we're dealing with. Before we start, once again, this is our goal here, is to give as much information as we possibly can. This is going to be a marketing-free zone, but I do want to thank Planet DDS, Denticon, the leading all-in-one cloud-based practice management software, for putting this together. That's going to be the extent of the marketing. Thank you, Planet DDS, for making this possible. This is really 3 weeks in a row, and we're going to keep doing this until this crisis is over with and we all have better things to do, like opening up the dental offices and going back to work. But want to give a really quick industry update before we get into our panelists. 90% of the country is now under shelter-in-place type orders. As of last week when we did it, there were 12 states that had essential and emergency care only, and still a large amount of states that were letting practices remain open. That has changed, I understand. I mean, there's been a number of shelter-in-place orders that were even issued in the last 24 hours. We'll be updating our materials on the Dykema DSO resource page. That's free for everybody, just to provide information. So we'll hope to have an updated list in the next 24 hours of the restrictions state by state. I can tell you right now, our prior restrictions of 12 states with emergent and essential and 38 that you could do dentistry without restrictions is not accurate in light of what's happened in the last 24 hours or so. But there does seem to be, what I want to mention just from what I'm seeing around the country, and some threatening emails and enforcement actions. If anybody that's dialed in listening to this gets a threatening letter from the dental board saying we're going to criminally prosecute you if you're violating the governor's executive order, and we're going to refer you, for prosecution or sue you or whatever. These are pretty standard. They're very severe when you get them. They can be very disconcerting, but my clients all over the country are getting these things. The dental boards are obviously being guided by the public health folks that are in a complete panic over this. I mean, anybody that saw President Trump's most recent address where he said up to 100,000 people or more could potentially die from this. Obviously, they're very scared, and they're, really being stern with the dental boards, and the dental boards have, are completely given into the fear of this whole thing. So they're sending out very threatening emails in many cases, or letters, and a lot of times what they send out contradicts the executive order. The executive order will allow for essential care in addition to emergency care, and the dental board will send a letter out and say, if you're not doing emergencies, like the patient is in imminent danger of dying or becoming disabled, you're violating the executive order, and that's just not true. I mean, I've had to address a dozen or so of these in the last couple of days, so I think there's a disconnect between what the ADA has said essential and emergent procedures are and the way the dental boards are interpreting these executive orders. And I just want everybody to be on the lookout for it. Don't panic if you get a threatening letter, from the dental board that gives you 24 hours to respond and says they're going to criminally prosecute you. As outrageous as that sounds, everybody's getting them now, and you just got to calm, take a breath, respond to it. And in almost every case where I've responded to the dental board and told them my clients are indeed complying with the executive order, they're only doing essential and emergent care as defined by the ADA guidelines, the dental boards have backed down, but it's going on, and I want everybody to sort of be aware of that. Families First Act takes effect today, April 2nd. We did get some guidance that if you furlough employees, last week we were worried about that. The guidance that came out said furlough or layoff are not subject to the Family First Act. We also got some potential guidance that dental offices may not be subject to it. They might be exempt healthcare providers. Now, that won't apply to a DSO entity, but to the clinical practices that employ clinical employees, dentists, hygienists, registered dental assistants, the guidance we're getting is potentially they're going to be exempt healthcare providers, and that's a pretty good update since last week. Obviously, the big news is the Paycheck Protection Act as part of the stimulus was passed, I believe, last Friday. It's going to go live today or tomorrow. We have a whole, obviously, panelist we're going to get to talk about that, but that's, you know, another update of what sort of happened in the last week. And the way most folks are sort of handling this now is, again, most of the larger DSOs and group practices are continuing to do essential and emergent care and following the ADA guidelines. There was a fair amount of folks that were open for regular business last week in some of those 38 states. Now that 90% of the country is under this shelter-in-place order, I suspect virtually everybody is going to convert to either closing or essential or emergent care. That seems to be what the trend is going on right now in the marketplace. So with that, if I missed anything, you can ask a question. Obviously, we're going to spend a lot of time on this webinar answering your questions, but I want to introduce our panelists. We've got Dr. Don Cohen here. He's a member of the OSAP board. You've heard me reference OSAP over and over again. It's the Organization for Safety Asbestos Prevention. Their mission is every visit to the dentist's office is a safe visit. Don is a dentist. He's a member of their board. He's a chief clinical officer for Health First, and he's going to talk to us about a lot of the resources that are going to be out there to operate a safe dental office for essential and emergent care, and how to safely close down your office if that's what you're doing now, and how to safely reopen it when the time comes. Don, let's just do a sound check. Can you hear us okay?
I certainly can, Brian. Thank you.
All right, stand by, hang out there for a second, but I just want to make sure, well, we can hear each other. That's great. Now, our other panelist is a friend of mine I've known for a very long time, Kevin Arnold. Right now, he's a director of Tusk Partners. He consults with lots of DSOs and dental groups. Before that, he's got many, many years banking. I first met Kevin when he was a senior credit officer for East West Bank. Before that, he was at Bank of America, knows everything about loans and has studied the Paycheck Protection Act, and is going to talk to us about, best practices and how to figure out if you're eligible and apply for it and things like that. Kevin, let's do a sound check with you real quick. Can you hear me?
Hi, Brian. Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Terrific. Thanks for being here. So let's go right to Don, and Kevin, just hang out for me because we're going to stay and talk to Don for a few minutes, and then we're going to go to you. But anyway, Don, let me ask you a couple things. Obviously OSAP, every visit to the dentist is a safe visit. That's really been put to the test with this crisis that we're having going on right now.
Well, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was on a call with OSAP this morning, and we're trying to implement an actual task list that would be ongoing and linked throughout for everything that you do in a dental office, as in covering light handles, wiping down counters, covering chairs, and so on, and literally having our teams log in. So a dental assistant and operatory one would literally be doing that throughout the day, beginning of the day, end of the day. Those are the kinds of things that OSAP is moving toward as we speak now.
Yeah, so let me ask you, we'll start with, obviously, I feel like, and I'll get your perspective, that those in the industry that are remaining open to treat dental emergencies and essential care are, they're really providing a valuable service in not flooding the ER with people that don't belong there and people that could possibly risk, getting the COVID-19 from just being in an ER. But we got to make sure that they're doing that safely. And I want to get your general perspective on, if you are one of those folks that I feel like is courageously remaining open to do essential and emergency care, what are some keys for doing that safely right now?
I think the most important thing we need to remember always is going back to the fact that we always practice under standard precautions. So every single patient that we even imagine, yes, is positive to COVID-19, is positive to HIV, to TB, And we need to assume every patient is. So that's the first and basic level. But going beyond that, it's really important, as an example, even in an emergent situation, that we call that patient again just before their appointment. Let's find out, are they having symptoms such as fever, coughing? It's really important, because if they are, then it's really important that we check in with their medical provider and try to work out the best thing we can for that patient. But to your point, do we send them simply to an emergency room, which probably doesn't have the appropriate facilities, say, to open up a root canal when necessary? So nothing is perfectly clear cut, but I feel, and after practicing for a whole bunch of years, we have an obligation to take care of our patients in these times. We may be doing this through a team strategy where we're part of a study club in a given geo area, and one office will be open on this week or on this day of the week, whatever. Likewise in the DSOs, where they may set aside this. But I don't think we can ever, quote unquote, and I'll use a legal term, pardon me, abandon our patients, especially at these times, which are of the greatest need.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody, has I'll very quickly, I know enough to be dangerous about, dentistry. Sometimes I even fool people into thinking I'm a dentist, but I'm not, make no mistake about it. But if somebody has a chipped, tooth, or a crown comes off and there's an exposed nerve and they're in extreme pain, going to an ER, they probably don't have an endodontist on call, and you're sitting in the waiting room with other people that may have COVID, or at least it's in the community. And it's really not a solution, in my view, to solving that problem.
Absolutely not, Brian. I mean, the reality is we may be unlucky enough to have 2 or 3 even emergencies at the same time, but we're going to do it the same way maybe you would have for a food pickup. Give us your cell phone. We will only have one person come into that office at a time without accompaniment, unless it's a minor, and we will take care of that one person in the dental situation. But always remember, as dentists, everything will be under standard precautions. It would be best if the office had N95 masks. It would even be a dream if there was specific laminar airflow, but most of our dental offices are not prepared for that, and there aren't very many that will be over the short term. This could very well drive a whole new movement as to air filtration and air treatment in dental offices for the future.
Now, okay, one question I'll take right now. We normally wait till the end, but somebody asked a good question. Can you tell me how you define essential care? And to me, Don, you can tell me something else, but the ADA has guidelines on their website where if you go to ada.com and you look, they've got a chart that says exactly the sort of things that they view are essential and the sort of things that they view as non-essential. And to me, for the folks listening in that are wondering how do we define essential, I don't think you can get into too much trouble if you follow the ADA guidelines. What do you think, Don?
I'm with you all the way, Brian. The fact of life is that the ADA has established some of the best guidelines on this, on infection control. Of course, we always defer to CDC, but if we're following those, this goes right to the point of, hey, you did the right thing according to the ADA. You had an obligation to take your patient out of pain or out of risk. There is no question that if and when, that's when Dicom is out there to protect us. How's that?
Well, look, this is a marketing-free zone. Thank you for the compliment, though. I do appreciate it, but it's true. We don't want anybody to get sued or take an oversized risk, particularly the courageous people that are remaining open to do essential and emergent care. What is your view on these N95 masks? Because I've heard a couple things, and I'll tell you, like, again, I know enough to be dangerous. I've heard things like the COVID-19 is 1 micron and the N95 is 3 microns and it can slip in there anyway. So all this stuff that's been made about the N95 being the be-all end-all, it may not be the be-all end-all, and they're in short supply and you can't get them anyway. So what do you think about all that?
So Brian, you included everything except one more piece, and that is if they're not fitted properly, it's worse than wearing one of those cupped masks that
Right.
do almost nothing. So the reality of life is most dental offices operate on either level 2 or level 3 masks, and they should be fitted well. Simply, they have these metallic pieces that bend to your nose and bend to your chin. And if followed properly, obviously they shouldn't be worn once they're damp. And hopefully we have enough of those in supply that we can discard them with each and every patient. They will, in general, suffice. The best, yes, is an N95 that's been fitted properly, but they're simply not in general available.
Yeah. And let me ask you this question, because I've been thinking about this a lot as well. In terms of, you know, from what I understand, again, the COVID-19, it's very contagious and it passes from, you know, person to person pretty easily. But my understanding is it dies. You can kill it. It's not some super bug. If I've read CDC, they said soap and water kills it in many cases. And obviously certain hand sanitizers will, and all the usual cast of disinfectants that you will use will kill this thing, correct? You don't need some super disinfectant that we've never used before to kill this virus, right?
The normal products that we would use in our office on surface disinfectant are perfectly acceptable and will kill this easily within the kill times that they advertise. On the other hand, look at the bottle, make sure that you use it within those time frames and that whatever you're doing, it remains wet for that kill time. And then, yes, the normal product that you're using works perfectly well.
So, you know, so just to kind of walk some folks through just some protocols from what I'm hearing, you know, one, I think getting on the phone is really important, and screening the patients, meaning if they call in and they're like, hey, I'm ready for my veneers, you can tell them right off the bat, you know, hey, your teeth whitening, your veneers, we'll see in May or something like that. But if they call up and they say, look, I'm in excruciating pain, you know, whatever, I got swelling, it's bleeding, whatever the symptoms are, and you conclude that, hey, this is somebody that's going to be an emergency or essential, you know, it sounds like you tell them maybe to, you know, you ask them screening questions. Do they have a fever? You know, some other background questions. Before we were asking if they've been to China, but this thing is so widespread that even if you haven't been to China today, that really doesn't help us. There's lots of other things, but maybe you ask them, you know, are they living with somebody that's positive? Have they tested positive? Just some screening questions. Then I guess when they come to the office, you're going to take their fever. Are you going to have them wait in their car and get a text or something, you know, so that they're the only one in the office? Can you walk me through some of these protocols?
So to that point, exactly as you said, Brian, I would have them wait in the car by themselves, again, unless we're dealing with a minor, and then we would text them, call them to come in. Recognize that some of the things that are very different now, so they're still coming into your reception room, your waiting room, but now in between every one of those patients, we're going to have to wipe down everything in our waiting room as well, or block it off that there's only one chair available for them, but everything has to be wiped down. If it can be contaminated, we have to assume that it will be contaminated.
I mean, does it make sense practically, like normally in your office, hypothetically, you'd have a bunch of chairs and the door would be closed back to the treatment area and you'd open the door every time a new patient came in. But it would seem like in this age, maybe you have one or two chairs because, you know, maybe somebody brings a family member or something, one or two chairs, you know, maximum that you use and they sit in. And then maybe you leave all the doors open so that they just walk to the back. So people are minimizing the amount of touching of things that they're doing that you have to wipe down, it seems like.
Absolutely, Brian. And you would probably even do one better, and that is meet them at the door, whoever was involved in treating them, yourself and a dental assistant, and literally walk them to that operatory. We don't want them wandering around. We want them comfortable. We also want to treat them as quickly as possible and relieve whatever discomfort, and then walk them back out. We would prefer them not hanging around the dental office in any way, shape, or form. This is not a time to discuss their treatment plan or even their balances. Do the same thing you would at a restaurant. You're going to give them a credit card and take care of it over the phone.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now tell me, when this is all over with, and we're trying to be more and more optimistic as the weeks go on here and start to plan for the future, when we're able to open up our offices, let's say you ended up closing, or, and now you got to go back in and open up your office. How do you safely reopen an office in this now age of COVID that we're going to be dealing with?
So Brian, again, a great question, but I'm gonna back up a little bit. Yep. And I'm gonna talk briefly about how do you close your office? Things we don't think about. Our amalgam separator has a whole bunch of particles in it. We should be changing out any of our cartridges at this point, because if left for a couple of weeks, they're going to tend to dry out and become a solid. So right off the bat, we've got to do that. Before we close, we want to drain all of our lines, all of our waste lines, treat them in any way that we normally do, including our dental unit water lines. We want to go through all of that. We want to take out any of the fluid, any of the water that's in our autoclaves. We don't want them to sit there for weeks. So we want to do all of that. But now it's time to open up, and we're hoping that's as soon as possible within safety. And one of the first things we need to think about is we haven't used our autoclave in at least a week. And the reason I'm saying a week, if you look at any of your manuals, and I actually took the time to look up several of the major manufacturers, there's a weekly maintenance that you need to do no matter what. But as part of that weekly maintenance, we also need to recognize if we deactivated our autoclave, maybe unplugging it, we might be put in a spot of, instead of just having to do one test, we might be put in a spot of actually having to mail out 3 tests and not use the autoclave until we get back 3 negative tests. So among the thoughts for those of us who have not closed down our office yet, I would not deactivate an autoclave, because before you use it, then if you look at almost all of the manufacturer's statements, they recommend 3 negative tests. Same thing as if you had a fail on your testing. Likewise, this goes through for everything that we have. Follow your normal maintenance. If you don't have the maintenance manuals, just Google it. All you have to do is Google autoclave at whatever the manufacturer PDF manual, and it'll come up, and then you can look at what it says to do weekly, monthly, or in any extended delays. But yeah, this is all coming, and if we do this right, again, we're doing it really safely. I'm sorry, Brian.
Yeah, no, 2 other things. No, very, very helpful. And 2 other things that come to mind for me are, because I get this question all the time. If I have a patient that calls me and says, you saw me on Wednesday and guess what? I tested positive, or my mom that was in the waiting room with me tested positive. There are obligations state by state. Generally, you have to tell the state board of health that you had a positive patient in there. But when that's all over with, so, step 1 is follow your legal requirements. We're not really covering that today. But step 2 is, now you found out that somebody that is definitely tested positive has walked through your office. Now, I can tell you what you're not going to do. You don't shut down the office, go into the corner and start crying in the fetal position, because no hospital shuts their office, shuts down just because there's COVID people wandering around. So I want to get your perspective, Don, on what do you do if you found out that somebody that saw you earlier this week has in fact tested positive?
It's interesting. I just got a call on that from an office before this call went on. And the reality on it is, if and when somebody has come into your office with suspected, and we're not even talking about confirmed, but suspected, the reality of life is you're going to want to take that office relatively apart. And what am I talking about? Not just wiping down the chair handles and things. You might even think of getting a commercial enterprise in to literally take your office apart. Could it take you out of service for a day? Yes, but the other thing that's nice is you've limited their access within your office. Also, that will, and this is not unfortunately a fun thing, but at least it will help to reduce the cost of bringing in a professional service. And a professional service may very well treat the walls and the ceiling as well, just to make sure that for that next patient coming in the next day, everything is safe.
Yeah, because there's going to come a time, maybe we'll get a vaccine or a treatment and this will go away that way. But there's going to come a time, presumably, when we're going to have to open up all these offices. This COVID is now in the community. And just like the flu, I don't know of anybody that shuts down their office for a whole day because somebody with the flu showed up. There's going to have to be some type of protocol for, we are a healthcare office. We don't have the luxury to just shut it down and not see anybody. We're going to have sick people coming through here, and it seems like there's going to have to be a protocol for handling that going forward. And I know OSAP's working on some things like that.
And to your point, it's a great question, and it's an answer that needs to be driven, but it's not there right now. So we're basically all on our own on this. It would be great if we had, as I said, laminar flow. There's no carpets. Everything could be sprayed, and after an hour, 2 hours, you could take care of any surface anywhere. That's not what most dental offices are like. So this is wide open, and I think we need to treat this as responsibly as we can, but also as reasonable as we can. We're just not in that same position.
Yeah. So anything else you want to tell folks right now? We're going to take questions at the end, but anything else that you think it's really important to tell the folks about how to safely reopen or how to safely, operate their office for emergent and essential patients right now?
I think it's really, really, really important that you not skip any steps. This would be a great time to not use regular gowns, but to use disposable gowns as a good example. No laundering necessary. Also, assume that every one of the patients you're seeing during this period is an asymptomatic carrier. Therefore, maybe we should take all of our waste during this time, and which we would normally assume is trash, maybe it should go into red bag, meaning regulated medical waste, because we don't want to take a chance on any of our team members or ourselves being contaminated because we didn't know the true status of this patient. That's about what I would say. And again, it's always about standard precautions. There is no place to skip a step.
And what do you think about, enhanced consent forms? I know some folks that are doing enhanced consent forms, one, having the patient certify that they believe it's an emergency to make sure that they don't get in trouble for, treating an elective procedure, and then telling the patient that they understand, but, by coming in, they may be increasing their chance of contracting COVID-19. I mean, what do you think of enhanced consent forms?
So it's interesting, you as an attorney asking me that question as a dentist. The reality.
My answer is, Don, we're doing it. I mean, I have people doing it, and to me, it seems like it makes sense. It helps you, but I don't know. People like you, maybe not you, but other doctors will be testifying on dental boards or in lawsuits about what they think of it. So that's why it's interesting. I am the attorney, and it seems kind of silly to ask you, but I am asking you if we go to court,
Brian, it's a legit question, and my answer that I would love to see. I would love to see something up on the ADA or something here. Have your patient do this, or maybe we, as because this is not typically an OSAP kind of thing, but somewhere have this wide open consent that would tend to be accepted nationally, because typically consents vary state to state as well. But I think it would be great, because at least then you don't have to have this quote unquote fear factor of, I now need to defend the fact that, to your point, I was heroic, risked my own health in order to take care of a patient in need, and now I have to defend the fact that I did that. So yes, I would love to have that available.
All right, really, really helpful. And we're going to have you hang around because we're going to answer, some questions as they come in about this. Kevin, let's do a sound check. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Brian.
All right, so we're going to pivot a little bit now to the Paycheck Protection Loan Program. President Trump signed it into law, I think, last Friday. What I'm hearing from my contacts in the banking industry is that they thought it was going to go live Thursday, that's today, or tomorrow, and there's an application that has come out. And, what I want to talk about a little bit with you is, sort of the process. There are some thorny questions out there about how do you calculate 500 employees? Can you lay off people to get below 500? If we're owned by a private equity group, do we qualify or not? Or can we have the practice, apply? These are thorny questions that I don't think we're going to answer today. There's some guidance, out there potentially that may be released in the next couple days that'll shed some light on you. What I want you to do, because what I think might be the most help to everybody, is if you assume somebody qualifies and there's no question that they qualify, how do they go about getting this funding? And I understand there's a limited amount of money available, that there's a time period to apply. Can you run through some of that as to how they get to the funding?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great questions, Brian. And you're right. There are some thorny questions out there that unfortunately we just don't have the guidance on yet to answer. But how to get the funding is something that we can definitely talk through. So the act was signed in last Friday. We received some guidance yesterday and some SBA guidance, little updates here today. Small businesses and sole proprietorships can apply starting tomorrow, April 3rd, for the loan. However, as I've been talking to my banking contacts, they are not necessarily set up to handle all the applications at this time. So when you can actually apply is going to depend on the bank that you work with. If you are, not a small business or a sole proprietor, if you're more of an independent contractor, there is some options on this loan program for you as well, but you cannot apply until April 10th. So for most of the audience here, I would imagine, is a small business or sole proprietor, and you should be able to talk to your bank starting tomorrow. Now, what they're going to look at you a little differently than they would a typical loan application. Usually, for any type of loan, the lender is going to look at how much can this business withstand to borrow and still remain repayment? How much can they borrow and we have sufficient collateral to cover the loan? Those are questions that are not really going to matter for this loan, because the only thing they're looking at is what is your average monthly payroll, and we're all going to lend you 2.5 times your average monthly payroll up to $10 million. So for your standard, solo practice doctor, you're probably looking at a loan somewhere in the range of $100,000. Obviously, if there's larger group practices out there, those loans can go up to quite a large amount, but they will not surpass $10 million. There are other options out there. Go ahead, Brian.
It seems, obviously the typical question is what kind of collateral you have, and we got to protect ourselves in case you default. But the way this one sort of operates is it's a bailout, and it sort of anticipates at some level for a high percentage of people forgiving the debt. So I guess it's sort of almost irrelevant what the collateral is at some level for it.
Absolutely. They've really set this loan program up so that in a way that they're saying we want to forgive all of these loans, and they're really trying to entice the people to only take the money if they're going to use it in the way that it's going to be forgiven. So you have to apply by June 30th. Once you receive the loan, you have 8 weeks to use those funds, and you need to use them for eligible expenses, which an eligible expense are things like payroll, employee benefits, and insurance premiums, retirement benefits, state and local taxes. Those are things that are going to be included. You can also pay your rent with these funds and other operating costs like utilities. But if it's not one of the eligible expenses and you use these funds for it, then those funds will not be forgiven, and you're going to have a 2-year repayment window. So it's a pretty short-term loan at that point, and they don't want you to use these funds for anything except the things they can forgive.
Yeah, because I read somewhere like you can't pay down your mortgage using it, and there's a whole bunch of other things. So if I'm understanding you correctly, and you take this money and you pay down your mortgage, or you do something else that you're not supposed to do, then it's not forgiven, and you got 2 years to repay it, it sounds like.
It actually goes a little further than that. Not only if you use it for things that you aren't supposed to use, yes, you're going to repay it, but they've also threatened that they would potentially pursue criminal fraud charges for using the funds for outside of the designated usage.
Well, I didn't know that. I mean, I was thinking of an accident. I mean, that seems kind of extreme to me. If somebody, I mean, I would hope everybody here would have access to, a good CPA, a good lawyer, somebody like even your firm that's consulting a lot of people on this that can help them figure out what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. But I mean, that's kind of rough if somebody accidentally pays the wrong thing, and in addition to paying it back, they're, going after them for fraud or something. Did you hear that from the SBA recently, or?
Yeah, there was some guidance out there. I was reading about that, but it's not, I would say they're not looking at accidents. I mean, look, an accidents are going to happen. Somebody's going to use some funds for something that is not necessarily approved, but there's good honest accidents that happen. What they're more looking at is, did you tell me you're going to use these funds to pay for your payroll, and then you turned around and paid off another loan with it that was not related to this payroll? That's where they would have an issue with it. It's not free money to use however you'd like. It's money to use for your staff. They're really encouraging you to keep your staff employed and use it for those purposes. And if you're not, there's other options out there to look at that may be a better fit for you.
No, I mean, that makes sense. This is a balance. This isn't a loan. I mean, it is a loan, but it's a loan sort of masquerading, or a bailout masquerading as a loan, to be honest. The intent is that without this, probably everybody would lay off thousands and thousands of employees. That would be horrible for the economy, horrible for these employees. So they're trying to incentivize you not to lay off people, and they're making it worth your while by offering forgiveness if you don't lay off people or only use the funds within 8 weeks for what they want you to use the funds for. Is that a fair characterization?
It's very fair, yes. It's definitely the way I look at it as well.
Now, lots of questions here. I'm going to summarize some of folks. I called my bank. They're not ready to do this. What do I do? My bank's not set up. I mean, this is what I've heard. And Kevin, I want your insights on it with all your banking experience. Some banks might not be set up for this, but don't worry. If your individual bank says we can't help you, there are plenty of banks, we know of, and we can tell you offline, that are, doing these loans. The issue is, because it's a finite amount of funds, there's 350 billion set aside for this. You got to apply, before June 30th, but it's going to run out eventually. So, if you don't get your application in on day 1 or 2, you're going to be fine, but don't wait 6 weeks or something, because it's going to run out. I would start if you have a bank that you have a preferred relationship with. If you're have a private bank, like you're part of, a big bank's private banking, or something, and you get, have a relationship with them, I would go there first because they'll give you priority. If you don't have anybody like that, there are many, many banks, I believe, that are going to do these loans for you, but you're just going to be in the queue behind their preferred customers, if I remember correctly, Kevin. And do you have any tips for anybody, on this webinar?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there right away. If you have a relationship with an existing bank today, that is where you're going to get the best service for this type of a loan. The banks aren't necessarily making these loans to make money. They're making the loans because they're preferred SBA lenders, and they have an obligation to take care of the client. They will actually likely lose money in this process by paying their staff to write these loans, and they can only charge a 0.5% interest. Which is not going to cover their cost of funds, much less the cost they have to run their business. So this is a losing endeavor for them, even with the small compensation they will get from the SBA. So they aren't necessarily going to just volunteer to write these loans left and right unless they have a client that needs it, and they're going to be in the best position by taking care of their client. That being said, I mean, there are going to be some lenders out there who are going to look at this as an opportunity to potentially find new clients as well. So if you don't have a good relationship with a bank today, look at a bank that you might want to have a relationship with, and you can entice them to take care of you with the best service possible by maybe offering to work with them after this process is completed. When this whole COVID situation wraps up, there's going to be businesses that want to continue to operate, businesses that want to continue to grow, and you're going to need a lending partner for that. And if you can find somebody that can help you after this situation happens, then you might be in the best position to get a loan quicker there.
Yeah, and these are good points. So for example, if I'm at ABC Big Bank and I'm part of their private bank, they're going to do it not because they're going to get rich off the program, but because they want to, help me in a time of need to keep my business, and if they abandon me, maybe I'll go elsewhere and they want to score brownie points with me because I'm part of their private bank. Likewise, there's an opportunity for some other banks maybe to get clients that they wouldn't ordinarily have by stepping up and helping them, but it doesn't sound like, anybody's going to get rich off this particular bailout program, and that's not the intent of it.
No, that's not the intent at all. And the banks have been bailed out before. This is, a lot of times, a lot of people look at this just as their turn to give back a little bit as well.
Now, something else I want to ask you about. People sometimes misunderstand this $100,000 cap. Like, there's a lot of questions here, and I've had people say, so if I make more than $100,000, I'm not eligible to be included. I don't think that's true. I think if you make $300,000 a year, you can claim $100,000 for yourself, not $300,000 for yourself, but you're still able to count yourself up to $100,000 if you're a highly compensated employee, if I'm understanding it right.
Yes, that is correct. So if you make more than $100,000 a year as a salary, then anything above $100,000 is excluded, and you're capped at $100,000. One question that I've seen is, what if I'm a sole proprietorship and I don't take a salary? So I operate on a Schedule C. I have payroll for my staff, but I'm not on there. And I haven't seen crystal clear guidance on this yet, but the assumption that I've been working under, and I've heard from others as well, is that if you're a sole proprietor, then your net income, the bottom line, assuming it's more than 100, would be limited to 100 as well as your wage. That's something we're still trying to get some good, clear signals on, but that's where we're at with it right now.
Another great question, Kevin. This is retroactive to February 15th because there's a few questions in the queue, and I've been asked this question a few times. If I laid people off because I was terrified when this happened, and now that this thing's passed, can I bring the people back? Yes, you can bring them back and then make the application with them on your payroll. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, and it's actually not only correct, it's required for you to qualify for the forgiveness in the loan. If you have laid your staff off and take this loan out and then don't rehire them by June 30th, then a good portion of your loan is not going to be forgivable, because they're only forgiving the loan as long as you keep your staffing numbers consistent with where they were during a specific period, measurement period, which for most people is going to be 2019. So if you had 10 staff members on average for 2019 and you laid them off February 15th and you only rehire 4 of them, then your amount of reimbursement or forgiveness is going to be reduced quite a bit. Whereas if you rehire your entire staff, then you're then eligible to claim up to the cap of the reimbursement or the forgiveness.
Right. So if this happened to somebody, like, the crisis happened and they had no choice but to lay off, pretty much all their staff because they just, had to close their office. And now a few weeks later, this bailout is passed. They have to bring, mechanically, what do? They bring their staff back and then claim their payroll as part of the calculation for the loan? And is that how it works? Or do they have until June 30th to bring them back? Can you give a little more detail on that?
Yeah, they have until June 30th to bring them back. And once you receive the funds or initiate the loan, you have 8 weeks to use those funds to be reimbursed. After the 8-week period, you can still use the funds all the way through year-end 2020, but anything used outside of that initial 8-week period is not going to be forgiven. And so if you don't use all the funds, doesn't mean they go to waste. You can still use them. You'll just have to pay that off of the 2-year period. So if I was in the position here, what I would be thinking about is, when do I think I'm going to open my doors again? And once I feel like I have a pretty good idea what that is, then I'm going to try to time my loan with the time that I can open my doors so that I can then take the funds out and be at full staff at the right time to utilize all those funds and have them forgiven within an 8-week period. Now, there's a little bit of a gamble there as well, because the fund is limited to $350 billion as of right now. So waiting does have some risk. I would say err on the side of getting the funds versus not getting the funds. But if you can delay them to a point where you are closer to having full staff in place, and you're going to be able to utilize more of the funds than you would have if you just take them out today and your staff's fully laid off.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, just to me, and I want to get your perspective, you kind of need to apply very quickly. Again, don't despair if you don't get your application in on the first or second day, but it sounds like within the first week or two of this, you really need to apply because this is a limited amount of funds. It's designed to run out. The longer you wait, the longer the risk that, I mean, it'll be horrible, but Kevin, do you think at some point they're going to tell somebody, hey, sorry, the money's run out, your application's in too late or something?
It's entirely possible as of right now. So I wouldn't wait too long, to your point, but I do think getting the application process started, get your funds set aside is important, but you have 30 days to take the funds at that point. Try to time the spot where you actually begin your loan as close to possible as when you're going to be at full staff again.
And the idea behind some of this is even if you don't have work for the staff to make the payroll and not lay them off, that's why they're forgiving it. Because there's a number of questions in the queue I'm looking at, like what if we're not open until May 15th and we don't have employees? Should we take the money? Isn't that the idea that you get the money in and even if the staff is at home without anything to do, you still make payroll because they're giving you this money that they're going to forgive later? Isn't that like the policy behind this?
Yeah, if you're taking the Paycheck Protection Loan, they want you to bring your staff back on and employ them. They don't want you taking the money and having your staff laid off and not using the funds for that purpose. I mentioned earlier, there are other options out there, and one option is there's an economic injury disaster loan. That loan is not forgiven, but there is an option out there that's available through the SBA that should your staff be laid off and you need some funds to pay the rent and keep things moving with your business, that's a loan option out there for you that has favorable terms that can provide you capital to continue to operate your business to weather the storm that we're in. But if you're not going to rehire your staff,
out there that if you want to use the money for other things, but your business is at risk because of this disaster, you can get other SBA options. You're just going to have to repay the money back.
Correct. But I mean, the economic injury disaster loan is up to $2 million. 10,000 of that is considered a grant that you do not have to repay. And they'll make that available to you within 3 days. And then in addition to that, that loan has an interest rate of 3.75%, I believe is the actual rate on that. And its repayment can be out to 30 years, depending on your situation. So they can make that loan a little bit more of an attractive payment to fit in your budget than the Paycheck Protection Loan will be. That's going to be a 2-year loan based purely on your payroll to entice you to bring your employees back and keep them paid. They would like you to not put your employees in unemployment. They want you to keep them employed.
Yeah, so mechanically, because I'm getting some questions here, and I think it's an important point. Some folks are saying, well, hey, our employees won't come back till May or June. Can I get the money and then start paying them when they come back? Not really, because the whole point of this, I mean, you can do it, but you may have to repay it because the whole point of this is mechanically, you may put these people back on your payroll because of certain executive orders from governors out there that say you can't open. They may just sit at home and get a paycheck for a couple weeks, but that's what the government wants. They don't want them at home with no income. The government, I'm just looking at some questions here, Kevin. The government doesn't want you to say, hey, I'm bringing them back May 15th, so I'll start paying them May 15th. No, the government says, take the loan, start paying them now, even if they're at home with nothing to do, and we'll forgive the loan. Isn't that the point of what we're doing here?
That's the exact point of what they're doing, yes. They want you to pay them whether they're working or not so that they're not at unemployment.
Right. So under these questions, a couple of them have come in that said, hey, can I take the money and then hold the money and start paying them on May 15th when they come back? I mean, the answer is you can do it, but you're going to have to repay them because you got to spend the money within 8 weeks, it sounds like, or else, you got to repay it.
That's correct. So if let's just say you get the money April 15th and you don't start paying your staff till May 15th, there's 30 days or 4 weeks that have passed that you've not used those funds. So now you have 4 weeks to use those funds. The loan size is determined by your average monthly payroll times 2.5. So they want to cover 2 months of your payroll. The other half is to cover rent and things of that nature. So you're automatically going to be leaving about a month of those funds on the table that are not forgiven. Now you can use those funds after the 8-week period is up, but you will have to repay enhanced use after that point.
And Kevin, can you run through, because there's a lot of questions. You did touch on this briefly, but let's do it one more time because some people joined later. What are the approved expenses? Obviously, salaries and payroll are up to $100,000, but could you run through some of the other approved things that you're allowed to use this money for?
Sure. You're allowed to use it for salary. You can also use it for group healthcare benefits, insurance premiums, retirement benefits, as well as state and local taxes. In addition to that, you can use it for rent or interest on your mortgage and utilities.
Okay, very helpful. If you lay off the staff after you spend this money, what happens then? I mean, that's a good question. I haven't seen that one before. Like, let's say you do what you're supposed to. You get the loan, you pay the staff for 2.5 months, you exhaust the loan, but then you're still not up to normal numbers after that, and you have to lay some people off. What happens if that happens?
So it's my understanding that the loan forgiveness will take place at the end of that 8-week period. So if you keep your staff employed, now I don't think this has been nailed down completely, but if you keep your staff employed for that 8-week period and get your loan forgiveness approved and then subsequently have to lay off the staff, I believe you're okay in that situation. Again, I haven't seen that detailed out anywhere yet, but from my understanding, it's going to be at the end of the 8-week period, the bank's going to approve that forgiveness or not, and you'd enter repayment.
And what is I think I've seen that the interest rate can't exceed 4%, but do you have any idea? I mean, they keep lowering the interest rates now because of the crisis. Do you have any idea what the interest rate might be for this thing?
Yeah, it can't exceed 4%, but the interest rate has been told to us that it's going to be 0.5%. So less than 1%.
All right, so that's really favorable. So even if you have to pay it back, that's a pretty low rate.
It is a very low rate. I mean, it's almost free money. It's just you have to pay it back over a 2-year period, which, again, it's free money almost. So I wouldn't say that's a bad thing, but it can stress your cash flow a little bit if you aren't prepared to make, an extra $100,000 payment over the next 2 years.
Yeah. Also, how do they calculate your payroll? Isn't it a 1-year average, or, can you give us some guidance? Lots of questions. I'm summarizing probably 10 questions I have here as to how the payroll calculation works. We talked about the $100,000 cap, but, some of the guidance that I've heard is it's got to be as of February 15th and a look back period before that. You can't contrive something or make up a business to get eligible for this. What you have to be doing has to be consistent with industry standards and in the ordinary course of business, as opposed to something that it looks like you made up just to get qualified. But can you tell us how the payroll calculation works, the look back period, or how you would calculate your average payroll?
Yeah, so there's a couple of look-back periods they're looking at, and you can utilize either February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019, or January 1st, 2020 through February 29th, 2020. And you can select whichever one of those is more favorable to you. And it's what you're looking for is which period gives you the highest average monthly payroll. So take those 2 measurement periods and look at what your payroll is, divide it by the number of months in those periods, and that'll give you your average monthly payroll. So let's just use an example of January 1st, 2020 through February 29th, 2020, and assume during that period that your payroll number was $100,000. And let's assume for right now that no employees, including yourself, were over $100,000 annual salary. In that scenario, your average monthly payroll will be $50,000. So you would be eligible for a loan that's $150,000. Now, in that same time period, let's assume that maybe you weren't included in that originally. Your staff's $100,000, and then your annual salary comes out to be, I guess your monthly salary, say $10,000 a month. That's a lot, but that's where you're at. And then you'd be limited to $100,000. So all of a sudden, your salary goes from over $1 million to $100,000, and that $100,000 divided by 12 is 8,333. So 8,333 on top of the 50 that was already there is the base that would be utilized to calculate your loan. So that would mean 58,000 times 12 is going to put you at about 700. I'm sorry, not times 12. 58,000 times 2.5 is going to put you at about $145,000.
Couple other questions here. Are 1099s included in the payroll? My understanding is if they're legitimate 1099s, we've had some questions. Answer that one first. I think 1099s are they not?
They are, as long as they're included in the payroll. As long as you have filed 1099s, they can be included in the payroll.
All right, so that one's good. How quick do we think this is going to fund? That's another question we're getting.
I've been talking to my friends in the banking world, and I've heard people say they're going to be ready to fund them next week, and I've heard people say they're going to be 2 to 3 weeks out. So I really think it depends on the bank that you work with. The SBA has received the funding, so as of tomorrow, when applications roll out, they are ready to move on the program, but the banks have to be ready to process the loans and get them approved and funded. So it could be, you could see people getting funds as early as next week, or it could take your bank a few more weeks to get in addition to that.
A couple questions here comparing this pros versus cons to unemployment. And it reminds me of some things we covered last week on the webinar with the Families First. I mean, it might be possible that with the enhanced unemployment that somebody might be okay on unemployment, but understand if you lay them off or even furlough them, they can get another job. I mean, that's maybe not a technical question, Kevin, about this program, but it's a reality. Yeah. If you said, why do I waste my time with this PPP program? I'll just lay them off and, unemployment's given enhanced benefits and that'll be okay. Well, okay, you can do that. But one, you're not going to be eligible for this loan probably. And two, they're free to leave. There is no guarantee that when this crisis ends, they're just going to come back to your office. They may hold that against you, that you laid them off. And I've been hearing from a lot of people in the industry that when we open back up, they sense that there's going to be some really talented people that they otherwise might not have had the opportunity to hire, maybe out there. So there could, as crazy as it seems right now, as tough as it is for everybody at this moment, there may be a hiring frenzy when this all ends.
It's incredibly true. I've actually been talking to some of my clients about that. Let's prepare for how you can come out of this in the best position possible. And if you're in a good cash position or you've planned ahead and you know what your plan is coming out of this, COVID crisis, you're going to be in a better spot than other people are. That might allow you access to not only employees, but it might also have access to, other practices that might be for sale, different supply deals that might be for sale, equipment deals that might be available, different loan packages that are better priced. So don't just sit back and look at this situation as what's wrong with it. Look at how you can prepare yourself to come out of this in the best situation possible. And that's how we're counseling all of our clients right now, is how do you prepare for this? The loan is great. Use that if it fits your situation, and then we'll help you understand that. But how can you come out of this better off than you went into it?
Now, another practical question, Kevin, a really good one here. Without funds from the loan, many of us can't meet payroll costs. So I guess you can technically wait until the loan funds and then retroactively make payroll probably. Is that, I'm sure you can do that probably, right?
Sure. Yeah, you can. They've received their unemployment checks they should be receiving their unemployment checks from the time you laid them off until the time they're rehired. I would recommend they just start paying them as of the day they're rehired and claim the forgiveness from that point up forward. You're right. Could you do back pay? You probably could, but I don't know if there's a need to in this situation.
No, probably not, but you got to spend it within 8 weeks. That's the key. And, there's a lot of questions that leads me, and I don't know if, some folks joined late or whatever, but we have a lot of questions, and we'll repeat it again, that are saying, why would we pay these people when they're sitting at home? And if we don't have work, you mean I should pay them to sit at home? And I just want to reiterate, that is the point behind this. The point is they want to make sure people aren't out of work. It's a bailout. They want to make sure people are not out of work without pay. So they're incentivizing you, in fact, that if your office has to be closed because the governor ordered it closed or that state ordered it closed, that the government is saying, yes, you should pay them, even if they're sitting at home, or maybe you can give them something to do to work from home. But if there's nothing to do at home, they in fact want you to pay them to sit at home and not lay them off. And that's really the point behind this in a lot of ways, right?
That's absolutely the point. Yes, the government is giving this loan to you to keep the people employed, and that's their goal with this. It does let you, from the standpoint of why would I do it, it does create some goodwill. Kind of back to the point, Brian, you made of they might not be happy that they're sitting at home on unemployment, and they might be looking for other options. But if they're employed and they don't know the intricacies of the CARES Act, they don't know how it all works. They know they're getting a paycheck. And I say that some people will understand how it works, but a broad majority are not going to understand how this works. They're looking at it as you're giving me a paycheck in this time period, and I appreciate that, and I can create some loyalty to your company.
Yeah, because you remember, Kevin, before all this, and I talked about this last week too, before pre-COVID, we were giving, your organization was, mine, lots of presentations on how to attract and retain talent. And it would always start by saying, really talented dental employees are very hard to come by, and you've got to attract and retain them, and they're in limited supply. And we were saying how desperate we were to retain these people. And then this crisis came along, and now people seems like are laying off hundreds and hundreds of people, and you have to do that. So, I mean, in some cases, there's no other option. But now that you have this bailout program, I would think for a lot of people, if you have an opportunity to restore some goodwill where the government's going to basically give you free money to keep them on the payroll, you can score some very goodwill with these employees so that you're not at risk of losing them as soon as the economy turns back on. That would just be my thought.
I couldn't agree more. You're exactly right.
Can you, I guess you just got to spend it in 8 weeks. I mean, it sounds like, we had some labor and employment folks on here last week. They said you can always negotiate on a prospective going forward basis, lower salaries with people, because there's a bunch of questions now. Can we reduce their salaries and spread out the loan? Yeah, I mean, you can. What you can't do is try to renegotiate time they already worked. But on a going forward basis, if you don't have the work and you've got till, 8 weeks to spend this money and you want to negotiate a little lower amount, probably going forward, I would think you can do that, but you got 8 weeks to spend the money, it sounds like.
You can negotiate lower. However, if your wages are 25% lower than the measurement period, then you would lose some of your forgiveness as well. So you have to keep them up at least 75% of what they made in the past, or you're going to be giving up some of the loan forgiveness.
Yeah. A couple questions in here that I just don't know if we're going to be able to answer about what happens if we're out of work for more than 8 weeks. What happens if this comes back in the fall? I mean, my view is this is just my personal opinion, anybody listening, that this is going to be a one-time bailout. And if this thing comes back to the fall, we're probably going to largely stay in business. I can't imagine, Kevin, that we would just shut this down a second time, but that's just my personal view and nothing more than that.
Yeah, we've actually had some conversations about this as well, and unfortunately I wish I had a crystal ball to give me that answer, but I don't. It's something we're probably going to deal with. So they're telling us we're going to see some of this in the fall, and it might go through summer as well. We don't really know when it's going to end. At some point, the country has to open back up, and we're going to have to change the way we live our daily lives, I'd imagine. Again, it's my personal belief as well that we will get back to normal, but I can't predict when that'll be, and I can't predict if it's going to come back again at some point. But I don't believe the government can bail out every situation. We're going to have to work through some of these things as well as a business community.
Yeah. Sit tight, Kevin. I'm going to give you the last word. But Don, we've had some. Don, sound check. You still there? Can you hear me?
I'm still here.
All right. Just a couple questions that have come in about your segment. what does this mean for dentistry going forward? A lot of questions have accumulated in the queue about when we open up the practices, is this going to change how we operate dental offices from infection control in the future? And how is this going to change it? So, we've got a few more minutes here. I'm going to let you address that, Don, and then Kevin, I'll give you the last word before we wrap this up. I mean, how is this going to change infection control and the way we operate our dental practices going forward, Don?
So I'll answer that in the basis that life is beginning to return to normal. If, on the other hand, we're going to be in this middle ground, we're still going to have to be doing all kinds of different screening. But assuming that there we are and we're starting to do what we normally do, I think you're going to find that we will be a little bit more careful about our reception rooms, our waiting rooms. And even as we were speaking, by the way, the CDC sent out an email, and basically two of the topics were on what we spoke of: disinfecting your facility if someone is sick, healthcare infection prevention and control, FAQs for COVID-19. So this is brand new. This was released. Yes, it was updated as of yesterday, and I just got the email through today. So be advised, the CDC is staying with this, but I would only again repeat, recognize what we were doing kept us safe from in the past. For those of us who are old enough, we did fine with HIV. I can't remember the name of any office that had a problem with TB, and TB is an ongoing situation. So it's really important that we stress our training for our team. And I would say before your team comes on, especially we've got gaps now, and conceivably our team could even be paid during this time frame based on these programs. What a wonderful time to retrain our team on infection control. This is the right way to do it. So that would.
And Don, let me ask you this: can you, sort of last word for you, if people joined late or they got some questions answered but not all of them, can you call out some resources they can go to? Certainly, osap.org is one. Can you give us some others where there's training videos and helpful things that would help them make sure they're maintaining proper infection control given this crisis?
So OSAP obviously is there. The CDC has some really good stuff available. The ADA, and again, the ADA has some really good definitions. What is an emergent problem? So there are a bunch of legitimate sources out there and it's free approaches. So I just really believe the key here is we need to know how to protect ourselves, how to protect our patients, and if our team is appropriately trained, we will be safe during these tough times.
All right, really, really helpful. Now, Kevin, accumulating questions here. I'm going to give you last word. First, can you just repeat the deadlines? I know it looks like some folks joined late and they're saying, can you tell us the deadlines for the loans and how to apply and how quick to spend the money? At the risk of repeating for 2 minutes, can you repeat those deadlines for everybody? And then I'll let you have last word on where are some resources people can go to get more information on this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So the application window opens up tomorrow, April 3rd, for small businesses and sole proprietorships. That's dependent on the bank that you work with. Again, we'd recommend that you talk to the bank that has your relationship, whether that's the bank that you hold your personal deposits with or have a private banking relationship, or if it's a bank that you have your business accounts with and you have a good lending and deposit relationship. Those are going to be the institutions that are going to help you to move to the top of the list because they have a relationship with you. If you don't have a relationship, don't worry. You can reach out to myself or Brian, and we can give you a lender in your area to go to. But it's no guarantee that you're going to be at the top of the list. You're going to go into a queue that will just get taken care of as you can. When you receive the funds through the loan amount will be 2.5 times of your average monthly payroll. So if your payroll is $1.2 million, your average monthly payroll is $100,000, and your loan amount would be 2.5 times that. And those funds would need to be used within 8 weeks for loan forgiveness. and you need to apply no later than June 30th to take advantage of this program.
Really helpful,
and-
Kevin. Yeah, any other
Good.
resource? Yeah, anything else you want to say, sort of as the last word here? I do appreciate your time today.
Of course. And I would say that the best resource you can do is for the SBA loan is to look at the SBA website. They do have some information out there about the loans. You can go to sba.gov, and in there you're going to find the COVID Resource Center for the SBA loan that's out there. There's also a link for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan on there, and that's COVID-19 relief.sba.gov. In addition to that, you can feel free to email Tusk. Our email address is info@tusk-partners.com, and we'll get in touch with you and offer you any help we can as well.
Yeah, and we're going to put all this stuff, the recording of this. People were asking about the recording. They were asking about Kevin's information. You've got, the website there. We're going to put this on the DykemaDSO.com COVID resource page. This recording of this webinar, everybody's contact information, and the latest updates. We'll make sure everybody has that. I want to thank Dr. Don Cohen. I want to thank Kevin Arnold for being here. We're going to do this next week as long as this is going on and we still have hopefully people are getting some benefit from the information we're providing, and we're going to do it next Thursday as long as the crisis is going on, and hopefully again we're going to start focusing on when the office is back up, what the new world is going to look like and what the best practices are going to be at that point. So with that, really appreciate it. My pleasure to be here and look forward to talking to everybody next week.